Welcome once more to Stories of Our Texas Revolution, presented and produced by the Tejano Volunteer Company. I'm your host and Texas History Ambassador, Ana Gonzalez. If you appreciate stories of our Texas Revolution, take a moment right now and hit the like button, and also subscribe to our page. Don't miss out on our future videos. Today's story is titled Band of Brothers. In 1825, San Antonio de Bexar was the Wild West. The early residents of the town, mainly descendants of the original 16 families of Canary Islanders, had to live their lives while constantly looking out for attacks from Indians, namely the Comanches. This story is about how the younger men of that generation in San Antonio, friends mainly, rose to the occasion and personally addressed the homeland security problem. Their shared experiences made them like 1800s versions of Navy SEALs. These same young men later became famous as revolutionaries with the Tejano Volunteer Company during our Texas Revolution.
In 1825, at the edge of the known Spanish Empire, at roughly 10 in the morning, a lone bell from atop the San Fernando church steeple began to ring loudly, continuously. The early residents of San Antonio knew and understood that sound. The San Fernando church bell rang for only one of two reasons: to broadcast an alarm or to proclaim a celebration. Every person, young and old, knew that if it wasn't Sunday, that distinct sound coming from the center of town could only mean one thing: Comanches. Since its founding in 1718, San Antonio de Bexar had been under unremitting Indian attacks, morning, noon, or night. The most dangerous threats, and most widely feared, were the Comanches. The Comanches were brutal, belligerent warriors and raiders, persistently attacking and always showing no mercy. From the Comanches' viewpoint, the Spanish were invading their land and consequently owed tribute to the tribe, and the Spanish owned many cattle and horses. Early Spanish settlers in Texas were constantly fighting off Comanche raids. That became a way of life for the occupants of San Antonio 200 years ago. Descendants of the original 16 Canary Islander families had to work or farm under unceasing observance for Comanche raiding parties. Particularly on full moon nights when Comanche raiding parties would attack at night, taking full advantage of the moon's soft night light. Many Spanish settlers, at that time in history, lost their property or lives in such nocturnal clashes. History remembers the full moon night of 200 years ago as Comanche Moon. To survive, those early Tejano families had to band together for protection, creating strong family bonds. At that moment in history, residents of San Antonio had a family member, or knew someone personally, who had been injured, killed, or in some cases, abducted by Comanches. Some scholars believe that the kill ratio kept San Antonio de Bexar from growing in population and fully developing as a larger Texas city. In 100 years, the local population had only surpassed 2,000. In 1825, San Antonio de Bexar was the Wild West. The only police-type protection the residents of Bexar and surrounding areas had was about 75 soldiers stationed at the Alamo, remembered as the Alamo de Perez military group. That force wasn't enough to deal entirely with all the Comanche attacks. Therefore, there was a need for more military or peacekeeping troops to assist with the Comanche threat, especially in the outer parts. Local men had to rise and serve as the policing dynamism for San Antonio and surrounding areas. During those decades before the Texas Revolution, many residents lost their lives to Indian attacks. So much so, that the younger generation of the local Spanish families in the early 1800s began to rise and coalesce as a united militia fighting group to address the homeland security problem. As it is with young men confronted with a dangerous predicament like the Comanche threat, especially in a very male-oriented macho society, there will be those individuals who will immediately rise to the occasion without fear and answer the call to serve. So, many young rancheros and vaqueros answered the call. History remembers that the locals christened those fledgling vaqueros who heeded the appeal to defend their community as Los Leoncitos, or the Young Lions. The founders and core members of this group were 6 young men who grew up together from infancy and whose families had strong family ties. To make sure that I don't massacre anyone's name, I will Anita to introduce the core members of this group. Anita?
Los miembros principales del grupo eran 6 jóvenes vaqueros. Manuel Flores de la familia Flores de Abrego, Gregorio Esparza, Salvador Flores, el hermano menor de Manuel, Juan Seguín, Manuel Tarín también conocido como Manuel Leal, y Antonio Otoño Cruz de Arocha.
This militia came together this way. Manuel Flores was a good friend of Gregorio Esparza. They grew up together, and they represented the tip of the spear. Manuel Flores' younger brother, Salvador or Chava, was best friends with Juan Seguin because Chava and Juan knew each other from birth. Manuel Tarin's good friend was Antonio or Toño Cruz de Arocha. Antonio was adopted or raised by the Seguin family from a young age. So, they knew each other very well. Their shared relationships with each other created a strong bond between them. Many other local vaqueros would join this militia's inner circle of close friends extending outward, including last names like Garcia, Delgado, Arocha, De la Garza, Jimenez, Herrera, Kerbier, De los Santos Coy, Rodriguez, Menchaca, Hernandez, and many more. In effect, this militia of young men represented many families uniting as one to form a superfamily of brothers for homeland self-defense. Keeping the peace and fighting off Comanche attacks made these young Tejanos renowned and admired. It wasn't long before the señoritas of Bear would swoon at the sight of these young vaqueros riding through town, and look forward to seeing the boys at the fandangos. In 1825, you could almost always find groups of these young Tejanos riding together, and for a season, these young Tejano vaqueros were like rock stars in old San Antonio. 10 years later, in 1835, Chava Flores and Manuel Leal organized a meeting to form another local fighting militia. Again, many locals attended the gathering, and 61 enlisted to serve 6 months in a militia company that would engage in the Texas Revolution. Juan Seguin was chosen to leading this new militia. He was supported by his best friends and brothers-in-law, the Fighting Flores brothers, and many others like Blas Herrera, Trinidad Coy, Toribio Lozoya, the Diaz brothers, and many other young men of Bear. Their newly formed militia became famous as the Tejano Volunteer Company of the Texas Revolution. This new militia would engage in almost all Texas Revolutionary battles and skirmishes to become the Revolution's most successful fighting unit. The members of the TVC would exemplify great leadership and bravery during that struggle. In the end, the young lions became fighting revolutionaries. So, this new militia wasn't new at all. It consisted of the same young men that had defended the town for the last 10 years. Texas history, never forget.